Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. My name's Jane Bayler, and I have such an exciting guest for you here today, Alpesh Patel. Welcome, Alpesh.
Thank you. Well, when you said exciting guest, I was going to look over my shoulder and say, I've got somebody else as well, actually. Thank you.
You're very modest. Well, we were having a chat about that beforehand, and you were saying that your family always prick your ego, don't they, and kind of bring you down to size. So,
Well, I was born in Yorkshire. It's a Yorkshire thing.
okay. All
Regular
right.
people.
Yeah. So Alpesh Patel, OBE, is an international best-selling author, investor, and expert in financial markets, recognized by both Channel 4 and the Financial Times as the UK's best-known online trader. His expertise lies in identifying successful companies and teaching others how to invest. He hosted his own show on Bloomberg TV and was a Sky TV host and a Financial Times columnist, and is a LinkedIn top voice. So it's such a pleasure and a privilege to have you with us, Alpesh.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
I at this point, I should say the pleasure and privilege is all mine. And it really is, because we've shared a panel before. I had a lot of fun on the panel with you because you're fun and
Yeah,
not sort of, because in finance, too many staid people are a bit sort of dull. So no, the pleasure and privilege is all mine.
yes. And that was actually at the investor show, wasn't it, a couple of years ago? And I
That's right,
really
near
enjoyed that
near near
presentation.
Heathrow, and it's the first time I'd shared a panel with you, and I think our stuff worked quite well because you were diving deep into the companies and their accounts and so on. So we complemented each other, I think, on the panel.
We indeed.
Oh, we're complimenting each other now
Well, we are. Yes,
in
that's
a
right.
different.
Okay, so we're going to talk about such an interesting topic today, which is the link between financial literacy and happiness, and particularly happy relationships, happy families, all of those things that are so important to our well-being in life. So this is one of my favorite topics, and I know it's also something that you're very passionate about, Alpesh. So really looking forward to getting into it with you. So tell me, why is this topic so important?
Well, initially it started off as just teach people finance because I know finance, and you can probably see there's 18 books that I've written over my shoulder, and yes, I am that guy whose bookshelf is full of pretty much only his own books. So initially it was just a passion about that, and then I came across, as I delved deeper, and I last year did a couple of TEDx talks as well, and I delved deeper into this, and there was a whole area that I didn't realize, the connection between finance and health and happiness. Now, I don't mean as simplistically as, yeah, well, rich people in the Maldives are obviously going to be happy, aren't they, Alpesh? Tell us something we don't know. No, I don't mean that. I mean everyday, regular stuff. And I don't mean being necessarily rich, but actually having a bit of financial knowledge, not expertise, and the links. And there's some data that I came across, which meant that the work I was doing was more important than I realized. I thought it was just, okay, teach your kids how to invest and the importance of tax-free savings in a junior ISA or whatever. And then, last year the NASDAQ was up 55%. Most people's pensions were up about 4%. So, okay, why is there that gap? But actually, when I looked at the data, 94% of people in a survey by a brokerage called Brewin Dolphin, which I don't have any connections to, stated their finances caused them some degree of stress. 94%. Okay, and you might say, well, yeah, of course it does, and give them more money and they won't do. Well, actually, that was across different areas of levels of wealth. I don't just mean people, say, at the bottom of the pyramid who might be forced to use food banks and so on. I'm talking about even as you got on, people who are the sort of the fat middle class, let's put it that way. And then 65% believe that they're not saving enough for long-term plans. They don't necessarily have the knowledge. They don't know what to do. They don't know where to put it. They don't know if there's any reliable information, or if there is, which ones they should rely, what they should do. They see the emails I get at the moment the most, given last year's stock market performance being so good. I invest primarily my SIP and ISA in the US, in US stocks, was, wait a minute, how come they've only generated 5%, their IFAs and whatever? And of course, that's going to cause them stress. So they can have enough for their pensions. If they see their American cousins, increasing their pensions by a quarter in a year, even if they just mimic the market, and then in the UK, they're like, wait a minute, I've got 4%. That's less than inflation. That's less than what high interest paying bank accounts pay. What the
Yeah.
hell's going on? Anyway, there's a lot more data which I can give you as we keep talking. But that then really made me realize, actually, this is a hell of a lot more important than I thought. It's not just about literacy. It is about stress, the impact. I mean, the number of lost days from people taking off work because they're stressed because of their finances. I've got the
Mhm.
data on that to share with you during the course of this as
Yeah.
well. So we're talking about improving the lives of pensioners, improving the lives of employers, because there'll be fewer sick days, improving the lives of employees, and improving our economic productivity, which, as you know, in the UK is relatively low for such a industrialized nation.
Mm. So many things to think about. And Alpesh, is it just to do with knowledge, or is there also a mindset thing going on here in terms of people's behaviors around money?
Well, I liken it to try and put myself in other people's shoes. And when you're an expert, that becomes difficult
Mm.
because you make so many assumptions that, oh, well, I can do it, everybody else should be able to. So I liken it to trying to get me to go to the gym. Okay. I've got a personal trainer who's an expert, but unless they get the psychology right of making it easier for me, removing every single hurdle and changing my mindset towards it, that, you know what, once I start breaking it into baby steps, do a little bit, don't try and be revolutionary with it, don't make goals which are unrealistic, and then surely it'll get easier and easier and I'll be able to do it. So that essentially is the way I look at this. There is psychology to it. It isn't just, oh, for God's sake, just do it. Part of that, what I try and help people with, is try and make it accessible, easy to understand, bite size. This is what we used to do when I had my show at Bloomberg. We used to do the Patel minute, 1 minute to camera on a financial concept, and you had to explain it in a minute. And now I took that idea to TikTok, put it on TikTok. I've got my most popular video is 4.4 million views.
Wow.
Clearly, there is a demand which is working, which is make it bite-sized, make it accessible, make it simple, don't overload them. And that's the problem, I'm afraid, with financial literacy at the moment. People give you these turgid books with sets of accounts, balance sheets, P&Ls, cash flow statements, and say, right, do your own research. There's 10,000 companies you could put into your SIP or ISA from the UK, US, global companies listed in the US. You're going to do your research on all 10,000 in that way? That way won't work. And so there is a reason why people say, forget it. In the same way, if my personal trainer said to me, right, I want you in the gym, 6 a.m., 5 days a week, probably would be good for me. But what? Suddenly she's going to be blocked on WhatsApp and it's not going to happen. So we've got to allow for the psychology part of it all as well.
So let's talk about young people, Alpesh, because I've got young people who are in their early 20s, and I can see that they have a real appetite. They really want to master this stuff.
Yeah.
And not just them, also their friends. I see that they talk about it, they're consuming content, they're trying to get to grips with what do I need to do in order to be in charge of my finances and be successful financially. Why don't they teach any of this stuff in schools?
Oh, I've spoken about this many, many years ago, about 25 years ago on BBC Radio 4. And I forget the show. And I was shocked the pushback I got, not from the presenter, but from other panelists. And the reasons are that came up, well, wait a minute, that's capitalism. Well, we live in a capitalist Western economy. You're teaching people to gamble. Well, actually, no, you're teaching them to do the opposite, actually, because gambling is what they're going to end up doing. And, well, no, the job of schools, basically history, something not controversial like Roman history or Egyptian history and all the rest of it, maths, English, not as if it was an either or, not how to be a well-rounded individual in society and understand your finances. That the state should either provide, was the attitude, or just give it to a professional. Well, the professionals are very happy with that situation because the
Mm.
IFAs and the wealth managers and the fund managers are getting billions and billions. They've certainly got no incentive to make sure you're well informed, other than you're well informed about their adverts. That's it. Beyond that, they do not want you doing this stuff yourself. What they want you to do is be scared to do it yourself, because fear works to get you into their funds. And I can show you data upon data, like you said, international best-selling books published by the Financial Times, which and in those columns, which prove that fund managers underperform the market. You'd be better off with an index tracker And if what the groups that I really address are the ones who want to know, first of all, how to even just do an index tracker. Okay. And I should say, I'm not a stockbroker. I'm not a retail fund manager. I'm not saying, hey, use my brokerage, use my retail fund manager. I'm not a retail fund manager. I just want people to be educated. You don't even have to buy my books. You can download them free. So, and the videos, they're free. I did a ton of free resources. Because people say, why do you do all this free stuff? I said, well, I just want to be relevant. As I get older, I don't want to be the sort of, yeah, he was relevant once. I want to be like Cliff Richard and Tom Jones of finance, which is still doing concerts around the world in my 70s and 80s and be relevant. And
The Rolling Stones.
the Rolling Stones. I mean,
Keith Richards.
well, I was thinking Mick Jagger more, but Keith aged badly. For those 20-year-olds, think of Taylor Swift in about 50 years. So the thing with the 20-year-olds, it's great that they want to learn. And the advantage, I mean, I started when I was 12 years old, and I didn't come from a wealthy family. I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth. It was the concept that I could be going to school, but there are incredibly clever people in companies. Well, usually clever people in companies. I soon discovered they weren't that clever, but some of them were in companies working incredibly hard to give me a return on money that I basically lent them. I've bought some shares, which isn't a loan, but I've given them on a short-term lease, as it were, and their job is to give me more money back than I gave them. So I'm not even potentially taking much risk if I'm holding long enough, because the data shows the longer term you hold, the less risk you're taking. And I thought, this is great. It's sort of reverse communism. I want to be the capitalist. I want to own the capital. That's what I want to do. And I think with young people, this gives them the freedom to do whatever they want. They've got the advantage of time on their hands. And education, I think there's a ratio. The education you get, the earlier you get it, the more it's multiplied going forward, in the sense that, I mean, David Beckham was kicking a ball at 5 and you become England captain. If you do this at 12, you may well become a hedge fund manager and, all the other accolades, a top voice on LinkedIn. If you start in your 20s, you're still incredibly early. And it's phenomenal how you can take that into whatever job you're going to go into, like solicitor, accountant. I'll tell you, sorry, I'm going to ramble on. I got a message last week from a truck driver. And he said, do you know what, Alpesh? I've consumed all your free content because I'm a long distance truck driver. So I listen to it on the audio and stuff. Absolutely love it. And he actually wrote a review and he sent a picture in his truck. And I posted it on LinkedIn, and that made me so happy. It's not the solicitors, the accountants, the cash rich. It's every single member of society.
Yeah.
I sent him a signed copy of my book, a physical copy out to, which he wasn't expecting. And I said, listen, when my dad first came to this country, he was delivering cars. And I was over the moon that, it's one thing to get your millionaire accountants and lawyers and dentists and business owners, with lots of money, and you make rich people a bit more money. But actually, the greatest thing is the marginal gain you get from somebody who might not have a lot. He said, look, I don't have a lot. I'm driving a truck, a lorry driver, long distance. And he said, but I love learning. And I just thought, you know what? God bless the people who want to learn. Because we're told, aren't we, for happiness, lifelong learning. Well, if you're in your 20s and you want to learn and not just party, though, do that. And if you're, in a lorry and thinking, well, actually, what I want to do is also educate, just anybody who wants to improve themselves through education, bless them, all of them.
Yeah, and that's a very, very empowering message, because essentially what you're saying is, look, anybody can do it. If you have a little bit of money, you can make that little bit of money go further by being smart around it and by learning some principles.
But also, you can start the education process even before you've got the money, in anticipation of when you will have it. Because when you're out there, say, working and earning and all the rest of it, let's say you're between jobs, or let's say you're a student and you think, well, Alpesh, I've got my studies and I've got gym and I've got pub time and all the rest of it. Well, squeeze in a little bit of this in between. And I'm not the only one doing that. I mean, don't forget, you've got all these business, Audible or Amazon have Audible audiobooks. There's always time to be taking in a bit. Obviously, you have downtime. Last night, I watched, for the first time in about a week or 2 weeks, I watched a movie. You will all have our downtime, but there are times to squeeze in just a bit of financial education and knowledge, because as my dad told me when I was young, he said, your education, nobody can ever take from you. Money people might be able to take from you. take your home, they might be able to take your liberty even, but your education, they can't take it with you because you carry it around inside your skull. So do fill that up.
Yeah, and the idea of traditional education is completely different to this idea of self-education and
Yeah.
lifelong education, which is basically the path
It's
to personal and financial growth, really,
it
isn't it?
it's become so vital. I went to a school, so I went to both a state and private school.
Yeah.
And I went to a private school where we still had the desk which you lifted up, and there were quill pots. Not that we were using quills, and people are
Yeah,
probably at this point
I
thinking,
remember
bloody
those.
hell, how old is this guy? What's his skincare routine? But what I'm saying is those desks were probably about 60 years old by the time I went to school at that school in the mid 80s. That's in my living memory. And we were doing log tables. Kids, don't worry about it. You're lucky, right? You've got ChatGPT now to do your logarithms. But the point is, to this day, that whole educational system is built upon what I don't know, 1700s, 1800s, that whole
Mhm.
system. Okay. I mean, they still dress like it at Eton, and bless them. I gave a talk at Eton College, and they're actually very nice, normal kids. But the point is, the dress code is, and I like traditional dress, but the point is, our education system, to what extent has it caught up? Now, actually, the funny thing is that the private schools where they've got more money, it probably has kept up, and they've got their iPads and they've got their internet access and all the rest of it, and everyone's got one-to-one time on the computer and all the rest of it. But the vast majority of people didn't have those privileges, and therefore they're looking on places like TikTok and YouTube to make
Mhm.
up for the education the comprehensive education they didn't get in their comprehensive education. And that's why also it's incredibly important, because it's leveling up, it's democratizing, and it's making sure, okay, your parents couldn't afford the best education. Let's assume for 1 second, and it's debatable, private education is the best, but let's say assume it was. Let's say they couldn't afford that and you didn't have that. Okay, well, you can still level up, and the way you're going to level up is you're going to go onto the resources that are available for free
Yeah.
online. You're going to take the time to do it, and you're going to catch up. And guess what? When I was at school, the kids that I was most afraid of in the exam results, when we had exams, and mine was a competitive school, so the results came out on the board and the teachers read them out. I mean, they started at the bottom and they worked their way up. So, in 55th place is da 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 da, and you went up,
They did
right?
that at my school as well. That's
Yeah,
so
and
funny.
and 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 you know who I was most afraid my competition was? It wasn't the rich kids at the school. It was the ones who were like me, who could barely afford, their parents could barely afford to put them there because they were hungry and they
Oh.
wanted to beat me in the exams. I wasn't going to do them any favors, and they didn't beat me in the exams, but they were the ones, and they're the ones with hunger. And when I get the emails from them and they say, I want to learn, they're me 40 years ago, and they're the
Yeah.
ones I really want to help. Not that I got anything against, like I said, I've spoken at various schools. I think I've been invited to Charterhouse as well. I spoke at Haberdashers. I don't care whether you're state or private, but the point is, if you're from a state school and this isn't the norm for you, and especially if you say, I want to do this for my parents, I want to have social mobility, I really want to help you out in that regard.
Oh, that's so nice. That it is what an amazing, amazing mission and so inspiring as well, Alpesh. So let's get on to this topic of happiness and happy relationships and the contribution that financial literacy makes to that. Do you have some data and statistics around that, Alpesh, or is it just something
Yeah.
that you've developed an interest in?
No, we live in a world where narrative seems to overtake data, and especially if you go on Twitter for 30 seconds. And I always sort of reply back to people on Twitter with, okay, what's the data? And silence, always silence on that. So I have got the data. And as I said, this is data which is from the research from Center for Economics and Business Research, and also Money and Mental Health Policy Institute, and from Bruin Dolphin. Okay, so those are the shout outs to them. And I wouldn't have the resources to get all this data and research. So 36% of people they surveyed said their financial worries which impact sleep and or their ability to do their job to the best of their ability. 31% said they often feel their finances control their life. And you might just say, well, of course, that's how, that's just living. That's just normal. Well, what if we could move the needle on that a bit? And if 31% feel that, well, what the heck are the other 69% doing right that we can try and get more of the 31% into? I'm not saying utopia for everybody, but even if we move the needle, 1% is a big move. If you could just make a difference to that 1%, let alone the fact that if this is happening here, this is happening globally. And I've got clients all the way from San Francisco to New Zealand, so I know it's a global issue. 41% are concerned that the money they have now will save will not last. Okay, so 41% think the money won't last. 65% believe that they're not saving enough for long-term plans. I said earlier, 1 in 5 employees report that they're just about managing financially. 20% of people in jobs, 20% feel they're just about managing. That's got to be worrying. If you said 10%, I was okay, and they're the ones with the jobs, let alone the ones that haven't. Okay, according to the same research, employees who are suffering from financial stress are 15 times more likely to have sleepless nights, take 1 sick day per year due to financial stress, are almost 13 times more likely to be unable to complete daily tasks, and are more likely to have troubled relationships with colleagues, let alone spouses, and be looking for a new job. So they're going to be unhappy in the workplace. They're going to be unhappy at home.
Right.
What's that going to do if you're a parent? What's that going to do in terms of, the number one reason for divorce?
Oh, yeah. Huge. Yeah.
So we're talking about social dysfunction. It's not good for society as a general rule, all other things being equal, to have a high rate of divorce. One would have thought. Now, there are times when it's absolutely right to get divorced. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you don't get married and then break up and think, well, that was a good thing, wasn't it? No, it's a cycle you don't want to go through. And if one of those reasons is money, not because the partner is bad or any other reasons that you'd have legitimate wife beating or husband beating, whatever, but actually just financial, then that's also a tragedy which could have been saved potentially. And that's worrying, because that could have been a happy couple who could have stuck together. I'm not going into marriage counseling or anything. What I'm saying is these are the ramifications and why this stuff is so important.
Yeah, and I think it's also something that we are not really trained to look for in partners. I remember I was with someone once, and the bills would come, and he would always put them in a drawer, and I would be a little bit confused as to why are you always putting your bills in a drawer? Why do you never ever open these envelopes? And of course, the bills would go unpaid. And it's a very, very basic thing, but because we don't have this education, we're not even really taught the basics. We're not taught that this is a part of life. Somehow, in many families and in many cultures, money is a dirty word. You don't talk about how you manage money because it's considered somehow slightly grubby. And so I think for all of those reasons, it is just not to the forefront as much as it should be.
Or parents wrongly might say to their children, oh, well, they just take care of it. Just like they take care of housework, just like they take care of everything else. I was raised by my grandmother, and, I would be doing the hoovering and I'd be bringing the laundry. This was in the days when you had laundry outside. Yeah, again, people are going to say, which Victorian era was he raised in? This is in Armley in Leeds, and you'd bring the laundry in from outside because that's where it dried. Look up the old adverts, kids, on YouTube, and you'll see that's what people used to do before they had washer dryers. And and so you do the chores, but also when I think I was about 12, my uncle said to me, he goes, well, we're going to show you what the bills are. Not because they were trying to pressurize me, because it's good that you should know that, how much things cost and the like. I will, if I pay a bill for something, very often, there was something recently, there was a bill I got for something or other, water, utilities, that was it. And I forwarded it to my wife, said I've paid it. But it was done not to say, look, I've paid it, I'm doing this or whatever. It was done to say, so she knows what things cost generally. Yeah, actually, it's £400 a month, not £4 a month. It's the old thing when you ask politicians, how much does a loaf of bread cost? And they're like, or a pint of milk. And I actually no idea. I should say I'm off bread and dairy, so don't ask me, because I don't buy that stuff. But I'd like to think I've got a fairly good idea in terms of, I know how much my electricity and gas costs. I know where the cheapest place is to try and get it and how to switch. All of those things that do make a difference. And they're a chore. Nobody wants to do it. I don't want to. Do you know what? I only recently got my will sorted. And you
Oh,
might think, wait a minute, you're a finance person. Why don't you? Well, because I'm an investment person, not necessarily a personal finance person. So I get it. I don't like doing those things and looking at those. But I know the benefits. I know when, and I say to my wife very often, there's stuff that we wanted to do. And I say to her, can you imagine if we didn't have money, we'd have a fight over this right now. I bet you we would. Because I'm aware of all this stuff that I'm doing. And I say to her, just imagine the couples who couldn't just walk into wherever and buy their kid a Lego set or something, or he wanted a bigger one and they'd have to say no. I said, can you imagine the arguments we'd end up having? I mean, how lucky
yeah.
we are as well. And that's because the seeds were laid when I was about 12 years old with the education. It wasn't because I was thinking, I want to have lots of money to spend, and I'm a teetotal vegetarian. What am I going to spend it on? And I don't like partying. So, but the point was, it's the little bit. You don't need a lot. And as John Maynard Keynes said, income, I think it was him or Charles Dickens, I forget which, income £10, outgoings £11, misery, income £10, outgoings £9, elation. It's that
Mm.
simple. It doesn't have to be a lot to make a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my audience are entrepreneurs, and I think the big challenge that a lot of my clients have, and many entrepreneurs in general, sometimes me as well at times, is the boom bust a roller coaster, right? Because that is obviously the dream of all entrepreneurs, is to have those recurring revenues so you can essentially replicate the benefits of employment without the drawbacks. And I think that is what all of us want, whether we've got a business that's running at, 8 figures, or whether we're just kind of ticking over and making a healthy income. So any tips for how to manage your finances as an entrepreneur, Alpesh?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have quite a lot of clients who are business owners, and for
Mm,
them, it's the key motivation for them is, look, I spend a lot of time, energy, and effort managing my business.
mm,
And if I put the same effort into some of my investment, a little bit of effort into but with the same intensity into my investments, then all that work that I'm doing in my business is made even more productive and efficient because I've cloned myself effectively. And
yeah.
for some of them, it's a side gig. It's a second business that they've
Mm,
launched in their own investments. And what I say to them is, max out the SIP. Remember, if your company pays your contributions, then that's all tax deductible. And sadly, the maximum is £60,000. Now, some businesses that's peanuts, others it's a lot, but that's £60,000, which will reduce your tax bill by reducing your profits by 60,000 because it will go into your SIP. So that's one thing. And then use the ISA allowances. So use those tax-free allowances because you're avoiding tax legally. The government actually has vehicles for you to avoid tax, and the
yeah.
ISA and the SIP are those. And then you've got your spouses and your kids' ones. And then within those, and this is where it gets tricky, if you've got zero expertise, now let's say it was my mum, okay, and she's busy with a million other things, and it's too late for her to learn all of this, etc., etc. She would say, look, I'm not going to manage all of this myself. She'll probably end up either doing an index tracker of the S&P 500 for the long term and just leaving it, or even worse, sadly, is just giving it to an IFA and they'll generate 4 or 5% a year probably. They'll have some
Yeah.
good years, they'll go, thanks to the market, and they'll have bad years, and on average it'll end up something really poor. Yeah, but then again, she's got no choice because she's just too busy. She's 70 and she's looking after my dad and etc., etc. If you're willing to toe dip a bit more, then index trackers, exchange traded funds, you can Google it, and you just go open a brokerage account the same way you do a bank account. And then you call the broker up. It could be a Barclays, a Halifax, household names basically. And you say, right, I want to buy a S&P 500 index tracker. They'll try and sell you a load of active funds, which will underperform. So fund managers get paid loads because they get commissions and kickbacks. I don't like fund managers, and I've written about it. Eugene Fama in 2016 got the Nobel Prize in economics for proving why fund managers underperform the markets. Okay. So I think that argument has been laid to rest, but the fund management industry exists just like smoking exists. Doesn't matter how much data you put out there, sometimes it still exists. So the index tracker, and then the 5% of people who I really speak to as well. So I give all my free education to the 95%. They've got
Yeah.
then there's the 5% that I'm really speaking to, who say, actually, no, what I want to do is I want to know the 20 equities, the stocks that should be for my risk appetite, that should be in my portfolio, the 5 maybe exchange traded funds. So they're not actively managed by a human, they're tracking an index. Okay. And if they want any of those, and then how much should be in cash, maybe 10% in cash for argument's sake. And then how does that grow? And how does that in later years become growth income? If it's growing after 5-6 years at 100K a year in capital growth, just because of the effects of compounding, then that's what we're aiming for. And like I said, last year, we were fortunate that the NASDAQ was up 55%, the S&P 500 was up 25%. Fortunate because I can't make that happen.
No.
Contrary to what people sometimes think. And I don't have a crystal ball to be able to see into the future to tell you whether that will ever happen again in my lifetime. And I can't guarantee any of that. What I know is that if we pick resilient companies which tick the valuation box, the growth box, the dividend yield box, the high cash flow box, the high cash flow growth box, and tick a whole bunch of these boxes, then if there's a tailwind in the market, we should do incredibly well. And if we select these companies, the best of the best, from 10,000 and whittle it down to the best 20, then we're statistically more likely to do better than a fund manager who says, oh, I'm only going to pick British companies which are in mining, or I'm only going to pick emerging market companies only. Well, they're picking from a narrow gene pool. So by doing it that way, doing it our approach and narrowing it down, holding it for 12 months so we're not trading our investments, and saying, well, we'll just monitor it for 5 minutes every 2 weeks to make sure nothing's fallen from the peak more than, say, 10, 15% across those 20 investments, then we know that if there's a tailwind, we should do incredibly well. And if there's a headwind, our investment should be resilient. And if worst case, as happens every 6 years and the market has a downturn, as it did in 2022, then we can hold cash, which fund managers can't. By their mandates, they can't hold cash, and we can sidestep the market. And all that for monitoring for 5 minutes every fortnight, because that's all you're doing. You're looking at your brokerage and go, yep, no, not everything's okay, nothing's fallen, so that's fine. But for 12-month holding period, and then do the exercise again. That little bit of effort is the difference between if you're in your 30s and you picked a load of NASDAQ companies and you got your 55% or more last year, which was an exceptional year, it wasn't typical, or you got your 4% from your IFA.
Well, I mean,
is it worth the effort? It's worth the effort.
It really is. And it doesn't sound like it's a lot of effort either. And I think that is the message that is coming across, that actually to consume some of these free resources that are available and to become empowered around, how to do this yourself is not as hard as most people think.
No, absolutely. And I say to them, look, email me if you've got questions, and they think, oh no, I didn't want to trouble you. And I say, no, you don't understand. I've got 52 now. I've got 40 years of know-how. It doesn't trouble me it takes me 0.1 second to tell you where the information is if you haven't found it. Yes. It doesn't take long, because that's the whole point of being an expert. It's all in air. Whereas they think they're troubling me. And I was like, no, it's fine. And I love it that somebody then comes back, oh, thank you so much. And you might think, what is wrong with you? Well, I'm normal. I like dopamine hits. Like anybody else. Guess what? I'll let you into a secret. I look at my LinkedIn also 50 times a day and see how many views did that post get? How many likes did it get? And I go home and tell my wife, that last post, we had this many thousands of views. I'm normal. 52-year-old grown-ass adult, confession. Yeah, that's what we do. And the 20-somethings are thinking, we thought it was just us. Yeah, it's not. It's not. And by the way, if it helped to get more views for me to do dance routines, I would, but I know it won't. So I'll pick finance. I give them financial information. Like I said, 4.4 million on one of my TikToks, and it was the one about, can ChatGPT outperform fund managers? So let's do an experiment. And then we did an experiment, and we asked it to pick some stocks off the back of that and see how it fared, and so on. And little snippets, and you pick a bit here, pick up a bit there, and before you know it, you know a fair bit.
Oh, that's really amazing. So before we wrap up, Alpesh, just have another question about property, because a lot of young people in particular they've got this kind of bit between their teeth. They think, I've got to have a property portfolio. And I've got a lot of property investors in my network, and I know that property is not the walk in the park that it is often presented as. So, what's your view on property portfolio or stock market investment, or should it be both, or should you? Yeah, love to hear your views.
Being of Indian origin, you can imagine, was sort of raised with property, and there was a time in this country where you could have social mobility from working hard in a regular job, like even being a shopkeeper, and about 10 years later having 20 properties in your portfolio, which is what happened with my family. You could do that in the 70s and 80s, and this is not a political point, well, it partly is a political point. You can't do that now. I bought my first property. It was in St. John's Wood when I was 27 years old, and it was a 2-bedroom apartment at 27 in St. John's Wood with no financial help from family. You try and do that now. In fact, I had a 95% mortgage and a 5% loan to cover the 100%. It was no cash down, basically. And did I pay it? Yeah. And then the second property was a 3-bedroom place. By the time I had the second property, on Hamilton Terrace, 63 Hamilton Terrace, I was living opposite Kaveh Alamutai, which is a name you won't recognize. He was at that time the highest paid employee in the UK. He was a hedge fund manager, the highest paid employee in the UK. And out my window, I could see my friend James Carnes's home. So I'm name dropping. But my point is, I was 30, 31? And that was just property. It's ridiculous what you could do. Sadly, can't do that now. And I'm not a property expert. And what I understand from property experts is all of those opportunities sadly have gone. However, as my aunt said to me yesterday, buy another property, because it is a diversifier. There is this link towards owning something physical, not just ephemeral like shares. So I would encourage it. Absolutely. But I know financially it's not got the returns it used to. And I know also on social media, there's a load of people saying, oh no, it's an absolute con. There's a couple of very prominent, one American, one British, who say, no, just rent. And I was from a generation, they never explained the finances of why you should just rent if you could own. I'm from a generation where we were always told, well, rent is wasted, unless you've got no choice. And try and buy. The problem, of course, at the moment buying is, and it comes down to bankers who screwed it all up in 2008. I met principally American bankers, Royal Bank of Scotland, was that you now need 30% deposits, and stamp duty's gone up to 5%. So basically, you need about 30% now, and the prices of houses have gone up. So who the hell's got that kind of capital? So
Very
now
hard.
it's a system which makes rich people richer, which is
Yeah.
fine. If your audience is rich, then they're laughing, they're fine. They've got an advantage, they've got less competition. But it means the regular people that you and I also speak to, it's flipping difficult. Whereas, okay, at least they can buy, or they can get their education for free.
Yeah.
They can buy some stocks, which obviously, what are you going to do with £100 worth of stocks? Nothing. It's not going to be life changing. But at least the education when you've got more money. But yeah, what's killed it at the moment? And if I was Prime Minister, I'd tell the banks, you don't need those capital adequacy ratios, because the banks are the ones who are saying we want 30%, we want 25 to 30%. So only the richer clients that they want. Well, actually, when I was 27, did I default? No. Did other people like me? No. The ones who defaulted was when they started doing silly money in America and giving it to people who were part-time workers on 0-hour contracts and saying, right, you can have a mortgage, everybody can have a mortgage, because the bankers wanted the bonuses. Well, I'm not saying reduce the risk ratios to that level, but they've gone to the other extreme, that regular people in regular jobs who in past years could have put 5% down, worked hard, and would have been motivated to make sure they worked harder, all of it. Now they're like, well, what's the point?
I know, it's a shame. It is a shame, but as you said, that doesn't mean that you just have to sit there and do nothing, because the nice thing about trading and about what you're talking about is that, as you said, you can start to learn even when you haven't got any money, because as long as you have access to the internet, then you can start learning. And then when you have a small amount of money, you can start trading. And then when you have a larger amount of money, you've already learnt the skills and you've already practiced, and then you can get better. So I think That is the very, very empowering message that's coming through from
Oh, I
today.
should just say on that point, investing rather than trading. So I'm
Investing.
talking about holding for 12 months
Yeah.
because trading, 80%, 70 to 80% of people lose money trading. So I'm
Okay.
not talking trade, investing.
Important distinction.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Alpesh. What a lovely discussion we've had. Now, if people want to, they're probably, if they've listened to this, I'm sure they'll be thinking, where can I find his stuff? So how can they actually, access all of this wonderful information that you
Yeah,
have?
well, I've got a very simple website which lists, I'm looking at it now, and it lists a whole bunch of all the free stuff, including free downloads of my investment book, free, connect with me on LinkedIn, a free investing course, which is actually rather long. Normally people go, well, if it's free, it must be like 3 lectures and that's it. No, actually, it's really long and it's updated every single week. So, if UBS issue a new market report about how the world economy is going to look, or Goldman Sachs do, that'll be on there. So all of that, campaignforamillion.com. So if they go to campaignforamillion.com, because that's a campaign I'm doing to teach 1 million people worldwide how to increase their investment portfolios by 1 million over the course of their lifetimes. So improve their pensions by the course of their lifetime. And we made a big dent last year because, as I said, NASDAQ going up 55%. There's a whole bunch of people who got halfway there in 1 year. But yeah,
Amazing.
to teach 1 million people how to make an extra million in their pension portfolio across their lifetimes, which actually,
Okay.
once you do the maths on it, is not that difficult in the internet era. And that's a trillion. By the way, 1 million million's a trillion. So it should be
Wow.
campaign for a trillion, but it's campaign for a
Wow.
million.com. And all the free
Amazing.
stuff's on there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciated talking to you today, Alpesh. Been wanting to do this for a long time. Glad we could reconnect. And thank you so much for all the value that you've shared with our listeners and viewers today.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Jane.